This podcast is part of the Democracy Group.
Welcome. We are talking politics and religion without killing each other. I am your host, Corey Nathan, and you know, I say this, we do this introduction all the time, but I really am grateful. I'm grateful again and again, and my gratefulness is renewed every time I get to do this, because I get to talk to these awesome people, these impressive people, smart people, engaged people that I'm really interested in who they are as human beings and the work that they've done and contributed to our culture. And we just get to do that here. It is an honor to be a part of the Democracy Group, a network of podcasts that examines what's broken in our democracy and how we can work together to fix it. And just a gentle reminder, if you could take the time to leave a review on whichever which, by the way, Waj, we got a 2-star review and it's all your fault. Did you know that?
Why?
we were getting these 5-star reviews. Over the summer, people were listening to Dr. Jean Twenge about generations, and we had Larry Wilmore. Everybody enjoys Larry and his work on Blackish and Bernie Mac show. And then we did our interview with Robbie Jones, and
he's great.
Yeah, and he thanked you in the acknowledgement. So you essentially wrote that book.
I will, if the book is a bestseller, I will take credit for it.
But it's about, Robbie, it's about white supremacy, as folks who listen to the show know. And then next day we get a 2-star review for being divisive. So our 2-star review is all your fault.
The funny thing is, so I have this remarkable gift of inspiring the gamut of emotions when it comes to listeners and our fellow brethren. It's one of those situations that each and every single time you bring up uncomfortable but necessary truths, you are accused of being divisive. Especially racism is bad. Maybe we should do something about it. Why are you being the racist? No. I'm trying to end racism. Why can't you just stay quiet? And I think it's one thing I'll quickly say is power doesn't like to be confronted. Power doesn't like to be challenged. All of us, we want to maintain our comfort. No one wants to be inconvenienced, Corey. But how do you change and how do you grow without temporary discomfort? It's impossible.
Yeah. Well, and it's a good point, especially with Robbie's book, because in all sincerity, Robbie comes from the Mississippi Delta, grew up in the Southern Baptist Church.
Inside out, it's in his bones.
Yeah. So it's a critique from and it's the kind of thing that we must do. I often, as I go through the Bible, I start in Genesis, I get to Revelation, I start all over again. And whenever I get to prophets, it always strikes me that even in Chronicles, even in the stories of the kings, it's the prophets aren't pointing their finger at Babylon or the surrounding areas. The prophets are speaking to the Israelites, but the prophets are speaking to their own people more so than anything else. So anyway, we're getting very deep into it.
Interesting point that you mentioned with when you so 2 questions. One question, one observation. But do you read the Bible start to finish, then you start again, or do you go to specific sections?
I typically just start again. I mean, sometimes there's a passage or a book that I'm reading something on. For example, when I was reading through N.T. Wright, a great historian's work, he was dealing with first century Israel, so I was spending a lot of time in the gospel accounts. When his books on the volumes that he released on Paul, I was reading a lot of Paul's letters. But for the most part, I just have this habit where I wake up and I read a chapter from the Bible, start in Genesis 1 and go, work my way through Revelation 22, and that's how I do it.
So, it's very similar. I do the same. I just kind of keep reading. I try to read about 20 to 50 verses a day. And then once it finishes, I go back, or if there's some verses I want to memorize. And the story of the prophets, for those who don't know, Islam, Christianity, Judaism, known as the monotheistic religions, the Abrahamic faiths. If you have studied these religions, you see the similarities, right? They share the prophetic tree. And even though Muslims say Allah in Arabic, it always amuses me whenever some people are so ignorant. They're like, they worship a moon god. I'm like, listen, you can crap on Islam all you want, but you got to know we worship the same God. They're like, no, it's the moon god. Nope. God of Abraham. Trust me on this. And what's interesting is when you read the stories of the prophets, they're very similar. You know, Abraham, Isaac, Ishmael, Lot, David, Noah, and each and every single time when I read the story of the prophets, when they come in the Quran or the Bible, you know, you sit there and I know this is some dark humor, but can you imagine Moses? I always think about this. If I could be a fly on the wall, Moses leads his people out, right? He's shown miracle after miracle. He has said, listen, I'm going to call out a whole bunch of plagues. Plagues are going to happen. All right, the Pharaoh is going to let my people go. All right, we're going to be wandering in the desert. Pharaoh's going to chase us. All right, guess what? Another miracle. Red Sea opens up. Boom. Pharaoh and his people get swallowed up. All right, now we're going to chill at a mountain. I need to go speak to God. Just wait 40 days. If I'm not back in 41 days, then you can worship a golden calf, all right? But just give me 40. Have I earned 40 days? And they're like, yeah, sure, Moses. All right, just 40 days. By the 41st day, then worship the calf, all right? And so Moses goes all the way up. And I just want to be the fly on the wall to look at Moses' face as he turns around the corner, coming down, having engaged with God, and literally sees most of his people in a full-on friggin' pleasure dome, like pornographic, cornucopia of just like gluttony and lust. I don't want to be blasphemous here. I can imagine inside his head, Moses like, "What the f, man? Like, really? I literally just asked for 40 days, mother effers. I said 40 days." So it's one of those things. I know. You sit there and you go, every time I get frustrated, I go, there was also Moses who literally saved his people from the Pharaoh. All he asked for was 40 days, and human beings with the attention span of gnats, being as forgetful as we are, couldn't even give him 40. So who are we?
Oh my God, I've never thought of that. So when I come downstairs in the morning and I see Lisa lives up in San Francisco now with her job, and so I'm with and our oldest kid is up in Humboldt. I live with the two boys. I come downstairs and I'm like, and I'm thinking, my problem is you couldn't put the dish in the dishwasher. So I can relate to Moses.
Yeah, it's very similar to saving your people from centuries of oppression. And people not listening, but it is one of those interesting things where every single prophet in the Old Testament, the New Testament, in the Quran, they are counseling their people, and they do it out of love. And some of them are frustrated, some of them aren't. Some of them have a little bit more patience. But at the end of the day, they do it out of love to make them better. Yeah. That's why they do it. And each and every time, what happens? Most of their people reject them.
Yeah. Yeah. So imagine Nathan approaching King David, with an exhortation. But if King David was, a MAGA, Trump supporter, what would his response? His response must be something very different. Fake news, I'm just trying to imagine that.
I think, what, this is where we might be blasphemous that we're comparing King David to Trump. But it is interesting that you mentioned King David, and the timing of that is kind of on point, because just yesterday, as of this recording, the actor Jim Caviezel, whom you all know, who was a fine actor back in the day, folks. He really was. And then he went off the deep end with QAnon. But just yesterday, he compared Trump to King David. And he said his faith is deep inside, doesn't talk about it. And another actor, Kirk Cameron from Growing Pains, who was a fine actor back in the day, kids, trust us, he compared Trump, and a few others have compared Trump to Cyrus, the Persian
King Cyrus.
King.
Yeah.
And both comparisons were that he is but a flawed instrument of God. And once you start comparing Trump to prophets and as instruments of God, that's where I feel like, especially if you take religion and God seriously, you have to speak up, because you have to reclaim your religion from people who have hijacked it for white supremacy.
I will embrace this exercise anytime someone. It's almost a challenge for me, because as I do read through my Bible, it is. I don't want to read it through the lens, through a myopic lens of our time and our place. But it is stark how every page testifies against the words, actions, and character of Donald Trump. one time somebody brought something up to me. I was critiquing the daily outrage that Trump, something Trump said, and he brought up a verse that indicated that it's one of the things that God hates is divisiveness. And all I said was, dude, can we read the rest of the chapter here? It says, these 6 things, no, these 7 the Lord hates. And the divisiveness, okay, duly noted. Listen, perhaps I'm causing some dissension by talking about what good virtues are of love, joy, peace, patience, kindness, goodness, gentleness, self-control. But of these 7 things, you got to admit, Trump ain't getting good grades in any of them. Let's keep reading.
And also, I mean, I'm sure you might have talked about this on your podcast last month, but I believe his name is Russell Moore, who used to be part of the Southern Baptist.
We had Dr. Moore on the show in July. His new book came out. The religiosity.
There you go.
That's taken hold of American evangelicalism.
And in a couple of weeks ago in August, he was mentioning, and I think he wrote an op-ed about this to promote his book, where I mean, it's really depressing, man. Priests and pastors are now telling him that when they're on the pulpit giving the sermon, and there's people in the congregation who come up to him like, hey, man, why don't you just say the real stuff that Jesus said? What's up with all this woke stuff?
Right.
And they're like, I'm reading the gospel.
It's
like,
literally.
No, seriously, come on, man. And it coincides with this white Christian nationalist version of Warrior Jesus, where, I think William Boykin, actually was William Boykin, who was a general in the war in Iraq, who then became part of this white Christian nationalist movement. He said that Jesus will come back with an AR-15. And so Jesus has become this weaponized mascot for, I think you would agree with me, an increasingly radicalized movement that is anti-democracy, anti-freedom, and I would say, Corey, anti-God.
Yeah, no, absolutely. So I think the fact that we were talking about the golden calf before and now talking about this makes a lot of sense, because the Israelites that left Egypt, what they were very familiar with, to them, worshiping a golden calf was what they were familiar with culturally. This is what reverence looks like, right? So in our culture, this is what reverence looks like. That we have a certain transcendent reverence for a flag, for example. That we have a certain transcendence or a weird obsession with guns, for example. So when when our idolatry kicks in, it's not something that's going to look 180 degrees different than what we think of as proper godly worship. It's going to look about 10 degrees different, just enough for us to be fooled that this is what Christianity is, or this is what following Allah is in your faith. But I can't believe we're already over almost 15 minutes in. I haven't introduced you yet.
Oh, yeah, but you know what? It's fine. At least the conversation is interesting.
Yeah. So Wajahat Ali is a writer originally from the Bay Area. Waj has been an attorney, a New York Times op-ed writer, a CNN commentator, co-host of Al Jazeera America's The Stream, lead researcher and author for the Center for American Progress's report Fear, Inc., Roots of the Islamophobia Network in America. He's currently a columnist for the Daily Beast and is the author of an excellent, funny, and at times heart-wrenching book. We talked about it last time. It came out in 2022, titled Go Back to Where You Came From, and Other Helpful Recommendations on Becoming American. And he is the co-host of Democracy-ish, which is an excellent show, aside from a guest or two that they've had on, which are very questionable, highly suspect. And rumor has it he's an aspiring gold medalist in the Lego Olympics. Waj.
You know what? I've, as you can see from my barren shelf, it used to be packed, and now I am selling and or donating a lot of my Legos as I'm entering middle age and retiring. Because like an NBA star, there's only so much, and then you're when your fingers and thumbs give up, you have to go out on top. But thank you for that warm introduction.
So you know what we can see? We can see Waj is indeed a man of good face, a man of esteem.
You are kind. I still have some hair. I am a South Asian unicorn, a South Asian man in his 40s who still has some hair on his head. How long this will last, who knows? But for those who don't know, Corey Nathan, mashallah, as we say, no evil eye, has a thick mane. So he's making his Jewish ancestors very proud.
Yeah, the Jewish Santa Claus of some sort. I don't know. So in all seriousness, tell me about Ibrahim, Nusayba, and do you say it Khadija or Khadija?
Khadija. Thank you. So Ibrahim, Nusayba, and Khadija are my three kids. And obviously you could tell that I gave them mainstream names to blend in.
Do they want to do like you were talking about doing the Wilbur thing? Are any of them talking about doing like Ike?
The funny thing is last time I was on, I did talk about how, when you don't see yourself represented in school in particular, and, I grew up in the 80s and 90s, so many of us, and I was lucky compared to so many, but so many of us learn to hate ourselves. The shape of your nose, the color of your eyes, your religion, your traditions, your food. You just want to fit in. And fitting in and being normal means white back in those days. Still does. That's the mainstream culture. We all have to acclimate to it, the rest of us. And so when I was young, even though I was surrounded by love, I told my mom, I'll change my name from Wajahat to Wilbur. Not Walt, not William, Wilbur. And the reason I chose Wilbur was because we were reading Charlotte's Web and everyone loved the pig Wilbur, so I thought they'd love me. But what's really comforting is, in the year 2023, we're in Virginia now, and where my kids go to school, it's so ethnically and religiously diverse, Corey. There's so many different kids. Like, they don't go through that at all. Like, our neighbors are Ethiopian American. The other neighbors are white Christian, I think born again. Some other person is Muslim. There's also Latinos. And it's like a very great snapshot of America. They get all these different parents and all these different kids going to these different schools with different languages and different traditions and different food. And all these kids are exposed to each other that no one, and my son's just turned 9, my daughter's 7, and my other daughter is about to turn 4. They've never, ever come home and said, instead of Ibrahim, I want to go with Isaac. or Ike, and in fact, the cool thing is their friends are like, Ibrahim, that's cool. That's like Abraham, awesome.
Yeah.
Or Nusayba, that's such an interesting name. So it's one of those blessings that you could sit there and be very cynical about this country called America, because every time we take 2 steps forward towards progress, as we're witnessing right now, the country kind of chokeholds you back. But then you see, it's a bit different from when you and I were growing up, where kids kind of get it. The kids have always gotten it. Kids are very malleable and fluid and agile. They can always adapt.
Yeah.
It's the parents. We're the ones who get scared and stuck and frightened.
I was also, speaking of your kids, I was also curious. A lot of folks ask you about Nusayba, and I'm obviously, I had my father say a Mishabera, which is like a Jewish prayer for health. I was also curious about Ibrahim. He was old enough to have gone through that. I'm guessing he was old enough to understand what was happening. What was his experience? Did that shape his early formation, his early character in any way?
Yeah, it's a very good question, and my wife and I have thought about this a lot because when about 4 years ago, Nusayba had stage 4 cancer right before she was about to turn 3. Very intense, as you all can imagine, and I hope you only imagine it and never have to experience it. I hope no parent or guardian ever does. She was very lucky in that she got that liver donation by a person who was initially anonymous, but then came out, Sean Zahir. And, right after she rang the bell, and ringing the bell, for those who don't know, is when you're declared cancer-free, right? With the new liver in her. It was like 6-7 month, just painful process. The next month, pandemic, shutdown.
Wow.
So we went from cancer to shutdown at a pretty formative stage. And, we have noticed that, and I'm glad you asked that. Obviously, the person suffering from cancer, enduring it, they have it the worst. But it's almost like, if you've seen Oppenheimer, the nuclear bomb, there's always collateral damage. The mushroom cloud expands, right? And so it affects not just the person suffering from cancer, the parents, the grandparents, the siblings. And my Khadija was in Sarah, my wife's belly. And I remember with Ibu, you can imagine this kid was like about to turn 5, and all of a sudden, mama's in the hospital. His routine is disrupted. I remember once Nuseba was spending so much time in the hospital, I had to take Ibu to the dentist. And that was just one of those things that his mom used to take him. And, kids are very sensitive and they're very smart. They're very aware. And it was supposed to be a routine dentist appointment. And my son and all my kids are very good at in barbershops and dentists. He just flipped out, man. He just flipped out. And dentists are used to this. It was children's dentist office. But he flipped out so much that even the dentists and nurses realized something's off. So I said, listen, let's cancel this. And I realized it was him kind of acting out, trying to need his mom, right? And there was periods, even like for 2-3 years afterwards, he said once in a while, he goes, Nuseba always gets all the love. And he kind of was really attached to the mom. So with my wife, she has to be a bit more sensitive to him. And he has a sensitive nature. And then even Nuseba, I think she's much better now, but there were these periods of, I think she had traumatic flashbacks, even though she was not able to articulate it, where she would just melt down. And then, I told my wife, I kind of understood how she was behaving. You have to understand your kid, as this old school idea, give the kid the rod. First of all, I don't believe in that. Number two, some kids break. Like, you need to know your kid. So some kids, a little bit of firm discipline, either you yell or you're stern, boom, they get in shape. But another kid, you need a different approach. You need a hug. Does it make, you need a gentle word. Yeah. Because if you go with that firm approach, you'll break them. You'll break them spiritually and mentally. So Ibrahim is a sensitive kid. I always knew that. And even Nuseba, as a result of this trauma of her cancer, I realized, once they're having like a freak out, I realized, it wasn't just the kid acting out and misbehaving. I think this poor girl and even this kid were having some sort of a panic attack or trauma attack. And once I kind of identified that, once you just kind of give them a hug or kiss them or just like are nurturing, within 5 minutes, they calm down. Yeah. And or anyone who's going through any challenges, it's important to realize that kids absorb everything. They absorb your stress, your panic, your rage, your anger. And they're developing a language at this age to be able to communicate, and sometimes they don't know. So you have to be very attuned to it. And that's where I realized, these kids are still, they're still going through it. And the last thing I'll say is me and my wife, we talked about this last week. We're like, we've never really had a time to like relax, exhale, or process. We went from Nuseba's cancer to the pandemic to trying to keep Nuseba alive during the pandemic to now. And I'm like, oh, crap, man. It's been 3.5 years. We haven't really exhaled. So imagine the kids.
Maybe it's time to write another play.
Yeah. I got an idea for a book.
So tying it into that experience, you describe a moment in the book when you were processing the fact that you have OCD, and you realize that possibly your dad had the way that your dad responded to you when you were explaining. I think the way you put it was that your brain doesn't shut off or something like that. And then, am I remembering that right?
You get stuck. And I remember, we didn't, for those who are listening, we didn't plan this out. I didn't know what Corey would ask me, but just about, so today's Thursday. So Tuesday, we had this conversation. Now, I'll say this. I was diagnosed with OCD in college. And my dad then, a couple of years ago, was diagnosed. And my dad, to his credit, being a man in his 70s, South Asian immigrant, for those there's certain stereotypes associated with a generation of men. I think Corey and myself, our generation and older, the message that we were given, Corey, was a strong man suffers quietly, suffers well, dies. That's it. You never whine. You never complain. You keep it all in. You just lock it in. Just lock it tight. Just keep it in tight. Even though if it's choking you, just keep it in tight. If there's a tear, you suck that tear back up in the tear duct, and then you die. Yeah. And I think it's your generation, my generation, like I think 40 plus. That's this old school generational thing. And that's how we were trained. And that's how some of us are, for better and for worse. This whole concept of self-care is very new. It's very Gen Z and millennial, which my hat's off to you that it's very good that they're doing it, because I think they learned. They're like, I think my dad was deeply depressed and traumatized. I don't want to go out like that. And so my father, credit to him, that he openly talks about it. He goes to therapy. He shares it, right? So I decided, Corey, for the first time in 20 years, I decided to, like an idiot, I white-knuckled it for 20 years. And I went really far. And I went as far as I could. And then in the summer, I'm just talking about a couple of months ago, I said, I have 3 kids. I'm still alive. I always thought I'd be dead by 40. And I have to be better, and I can be better. And I've only, I'm going 75%, and I know I could go 100, and I've only gone 75% for 20 years. Does that make sense? Where could I have gone? Where could I have gone if I had a full 100?
I see. I see.
So I went to a therapist. I finally started going for OCD. And the therapist heard me, and she goes, it's very impressive. You know yourself really well. You've done a lot of work. You're very aware. You're much better off than most people who come here. But wow, you must have suffered. And you're like, yeah, you suffered quietly for so long. And my session was on Tuesday, which was 2 days ago. And I told her, I said, right before I was driving, I just had a random memory. When I was 11, I used to go every week to get allergy shots. For those who know, they know. And it's just painful. And then it becomes every other week, then becomes once a month. But it's just super painful. I have terrible allergy shots. And I said, living in the Bay Area, it was next to Value Fair Mall. If you know, you know. And on the way back, my dad and I used to go to the Valley Fair Mall every week for 6 months. And my dad used to buy 10 shirts and ties, then the next week return them, then buy 10 shirts and ties, next week return them, then buy 10 shirts and ties, and I never saw him wear the tie. And at that time, I kind of realized this was not normal because I'm like, I want to go home. It's like Sunday.
Oh.
And then I thought about it, and I told my dad, I said, do you remember this? And my mom was on the phone. And my father said, yeah. And I told this to my therapist, and she said, and she's deeply empathetic. She goes, oh, I feel so bad for him. He was engaging in a compulsion without realizing it. Yeah. And so once you diagnose this, Corey, and I think especially with the elders who are listening, once you find out from your elders, a grandfather or dad, they get diagnosed with depression or anxiety, it's like this like blinders come off your eyes, and you look back in your past and you go, oh, that makes sense. That's why they behaved the way they did.
Right.
And I told my dad that. I'm like, that's why you behaved in those ways. And he goes, yeah, I didn't know. I had OCD.
So interestingly, I've never shared this story, I don't think, but my Aunt Rosie died, and she was I think she was the youngest of the Blick sisters. I was named after my great-grandmother, Hannah Blick, or she was Hannah Kraval. And I was a teenager, I think, or maybe late teens, and I leaned over to my dad. I said, Dad, Rosie was crazy. And he said, Rosie and everyone earned the right to be crazy. They came from Russia. It was actually Ukraine, but they called it Russia when they were still there. And I kind of dismissed, based on their life experience, that that was the case, but we didn't consider the possibility that there is this, whether it's generational trauma or the chemical makeup of our brain, that Hannah was actually manic depressive. And then subsequently I was diagnosed manic depressive bipolar in 2007. There's this. That's one of the reasons I asked you about mental health. I was curious if what other tools you've developed to manage OCD, or I'm sure that you had seasonal anxiety or depression at different times. What tools have you developed?
Yeah, so look, I think you will agree with me that oftentimes Western society romanticizes mental health in a way, especially when you're a writer or a creative or an artist. Oh, they need to suffer.
If you're not suffering, you're not trying.
Yeah, if you're not suffering. And then also this really absurd, sadistic and masochistic kind of puritanical Nietzsche way of life. Whatever doesn't kill you makes you stronger. And no one ever adds, yeah, but it might leave scars and wounds, right? But, America's like, you got to suffer. And I'm like, I think that's incomplete. And I mentioned that because it goes back to my original point about masculinity and men and what we were taught. You suffer quietly, you suffer well, that's a dignified life, and then you die with honor. But is it really honorable? And then you also think to yourself, that person, especially that dad, if he had gotten help, maybe his wife would have been happier. maybe his kids would have been happier. Maybe he would have been more productive. Right.
That's where it breaks my heart the most, is because my kids are 22, 20, and 18. And I think if I were more earnest about managing this, keeping within healthier levels at times, as well as understanding and naming, I wouldn't say that I'm a classic narcissist, but I definitely have narcissistic tendencies because of I don't need to go into it, but to be able to understand that, name that. And I think I would have been a better father when they were little. So that it grieves me that I couldn't, but it's all a process. Every day is a new day. Every day is a new opportunity.
Yeah, it's a process. And so you're onto it. To answer your question, I think the most difficult thing for most people is to name it. And the reason for that is, first and foremost, so when you're talking about how to process it and how to help yourself, first and foremost, to understand. Because many of us, we feel like we're crazy and like, why is my brain this way? And I know something's off. But going back to this really toxic ideal of masculinity, don't share anything. And so what happens then is you feel shame. And shame and doubt and guilt is like fuel to the fire of mental health disability, especially OCD. I think same thing with manic depressive behavior, bipolar, right? So you feel shame, you feel guilt, you feel like defective. You feel there's something wrong with you. You can't tell anyone. If you feel like you tell someone, you feel like you'll be judged, and no one wants to be judged and no one wants to be seen as less than. So what do? You suffer quietly, which is the worst, right? So the first decision is, I'm done suffering quietly. I have to go get help. That help can be in the form of talking to someone, either a therapist or a loved one, someone you trust, and being like, yo, there's something happening inside me. What do I do? That's number one. What I would also say, number two, that has really helped, and I only speak from experience, I'm not trying to BS anyone, I'm trying to be as raw and honest as possible, is as quickly as you can, jettison the shame and guilt. If you can get rid of that as quickly as you can, it's like pouring like salve over yourself, right? Like you will heal immediately, because that is like just you whipping yourself. It's unnecessary masochism. The shame and the guilt do nothing. So you just simply say, you know what? This is how God made me. Other people work this way. For whatever reason, I have an electrical misfiring. It's fine. Some people have a lisp. Some people have a limp. Some people have a stutter. I got this one wire that just needs a little bit of manual help to get, to cross. And so once you can do that, and you could be as gentle as yourself with it, I think that's number one, because you unburden yourself. The second thing is, if you could talk to someone, that's another unburdening. The third thing I would say is, then you understand how your brain works, right? And so getting the knowledge, Corey, this is OCD. Like, once I started reading it, I'm like, this is how my brain works.
Yeah.
I'm not crazy. This is why my brain does what it does. Every other person has the same exact thoughts, sensations, and feelings. It's just that I have a misfiring in my brain that raises the alarm, and the alarm that gets raised floods my body with this feeling and sense of dread and flight. And if everybody else had this misfire, they'd behave exactly the same way. I'm not crazy. I knew I was never crazy. Right. And I'm logical, and I'm aware, and I feel the need to do these compulsions to escape, as anyone else would do. Like, if there's a bear in front of you, what do? Fight, flight, you run. Well, with OCD and anxiety disorders, the bear, you imagine the bear, and logically there's no bear in front of you, but your body can't tell the difference. It produces the same feeling of fear. And so you have to come up with some behavior to get out, right? So you're like, that's why I do the compulsions. And the compulsions then lead into the cycle. So what do I have to do? I have to change my behaviors. And then you realize, which is so amazing about the elasticity of human beings. We touched upon it briefly, how kids are like this naturally, and how, unfortunately, as we grow older, we become more rigid. You change your brain chemistry by changing your behavior, right? And so as a result of going to therapy, and I did as much as I could by myself, Corey, and now with a therapist, the reason why it's helped is I told the therapist on the day one, I've gone as far as I can. I think I'm at 75%. I need a partner to see where I'm going wrong, to look at my blind spots and help me the rest of the way. And in 2 months, I'll tell you, I've only been doing it 2 months. I've gone from 75% to 85%. And the last thing I'll say is, and it'll take time, and I realize perfection is not the answer. because this is a lifelong condition for us. But I know how I work, and I know, what do they say? Know yourself and know your creator. There's a saying in Islam, I think the same in other religious traditions. Know yourself and you get to know your creator, right? Like, how does your creator create you? Everyone's a bit different. And the last thing I'll say is surrounding yourself with loved ones. I'm very lucky. My wife is deeply empathetic. She's a doctor. She gets it. She's understanding. My parents are very understanding. And, I'll say this last thing I'll say, and thank you for spending time on this, because hopefully I think it might help people. I wrote an article about this, Corey, a couple of years ago in the New York Times. And before writing it, I was like, people will make fun of me. They'll mock me. They'll ridicule me. My enemies and critics will use this to destroy me. But I'll still put it out there. None of that happened. Instead, I got all these emails of encouragement, but also, and what saddens me, is so many people. Man, that's me.
Wow.
And then one other thing I'll say, one father, I'll never forget this. One father said, my son's OCD growing up caused a rift in our relationship because it used to frustrate me because I never used to understand why he behaved the way he behaved. And I used to get so frustrated. And your essay was the first time it gave me a window into why he is the way he is. And I wish I could go back and change some of the things my behavior with him, because I just didn't know.
Yeah. That's good stuff. That's a
Sorry
nice,
for that TED Talk. You asked me a simple question. I went
No, that's what I asked for. It's a good few tools that we can put in that toolbox, because we need that. And to your point, I had this conversation with Pete Wehner. He was gracious enough to delve into it with me a little bit, and it forced me to take inventory of what tools I have and what tools I can incorporate. One of which is what you just said, is that being mindful about being with people that are loving and that care about us, being with people, because I don't know, every condition is a little bit different, but especially when I'm in the depressive part of the cycle, it's a good thing my dogs bug the shit out of me every morning to take them out, because it's like the hard part is just literally getting out of bed.
That's right.
So
just to put one foot in front of the other and move.
Yeah. So speaking
Corey, I will say this, because the podcast is called Talking Politics and Religion Without Killing Each Other, and we could talk about religion here. There is one final aspect, if you can indulge me.
Sure.
Especially when you come from religious communities, the worst thing you could say to someone who's suffering from OCD or depression or bipolar disorder, pray it away. Oh, you just have weak faith.
So to your point, the church I was going to when I first became a Christian, I don't know if you've ever heard of John MacArthur. He's a fundamentalists are like, hippie liberals compared to John MacArthur. If you don't believe in 6 literal 24-hour days, well, you're clearly going to hell like right now. So our church is very much, we're in that valley where his university is, and our church was originally planted by John MacArthur and his people. So that's the sentiment that prevails. It's the prevailing theology. So I shared with somebody the possibility, I think I might be suffering from depression. The first response was, you don't have a depression issue, you have a sin issue.
Yeah.
And that just like, oh, that's great. Now I really want to go, jump off a building.
Now I just want to kill myself. I didn't want to kill myself, but now I just want to jump off the bridge because I'm useless. I'm such a piece of shit. Right.
So
it's the worst.
So I know we're running short on time. I did have so many things I wanted to talk to you about. Since you're a recovering attorney and I've been binge watching Suits, I wanted to get into legal questions with you because we're both really, but I don't want to go there. I do have one thing I wanted to ask you about. In a piece you wrote for the New York Times, I think it was in June, you asked this really thought-provoking question. What you said is it truly inclusive and tolerant to signal to LGBTQ kids or LGBTQ parents that simply reading a book or learning about their existence might be so threatening and offensive that it requires an opt-out option in schools? Now, I bring this up because it doesn't have an obvious answer, if for no other reason than Toni Morrison, who I knew you and knew your play. She once said, Wajahat's play is brilliant, moving, shapely, clever. No, that's not the quote. That is a quote from Toni Morrison, by the way.
Yeah, that was Toni Morrison's very lovely.
You must have hacked my notes to get to. No, what she also said was, where's the quote? Parents have a right to restrict books in the home. They have a right to tell their own children what to read. So, of that whole essay, there was so much that I was aligned with what you were saying, about 95 to 99% of it. And then this one thing that you said, I said, I see your point, that it's communicating something to our community that we can't even, that we'd opt our children out. But at the end of the day, does a parent have the right to curate what their children are reading?
So this is the balance. Look, and I'll be very straightforward and honest about it. What we're witnessing in America in 2023 is a record number of book bans.
Yeah.
This was manufactured openly by a person called Christopher Rufio, who was a right-wing filmmaker who then became kind of a right-wing agitator, who has openly said, and it's like the analogy I give is like a Bond villain. Instead of revealing his plot in the third act, he just meets James Bond before the title credits where the Golden Girls are dancing and says, hey, you want a slideshow of my evil plan? Here it is. and so he has openly shared that his whole plan was to make CRT into a boogeyman. And he said, if we can weaponize CRT, then it can become we could put anything in it and get our agenda across, right? So first, if you remember, about 2 years ago, it happened in Virginia. It also began in Loudoun County, Corey, which is one of the wealthiest counties in America and one of the last counties to desegregate. Those always go hand in hand, where there was a right-wing operation. I'm talking about right-wing officials, a few parents, activists, and a lot of right-wing money to make Loudoun County into a laboratory for what could have been a national project, which is to go after books written by black women, number one. This was right after the killing of George Floyd and when this country, for like maybe a brief minute, was into diversity, and LGBTQ. Now, as a result of that iteration, if you will, they realized, okay, we're not gaining that much traction on banning books by Toni Morrison. But you know that group that people are really scared of? The T's. Yeah. Transgender. So just look at the last 2 years, the evolution. I know because we're so overdosed with stuff, people forget. But it began with Black Lives Matter. It began with books written by black women. Then, and it's still happening, by the way, they banned AP African American Studies in Florida. Then it became Don't Say Gay, Stop the Woke Act, and now it's the T's. Because when it comes to T's, transgender, it is one of the most marginalized groups in America, one of the most misunderstood. And it's a Trojan horse in which you can launder everything else.
Right.
Ban AP African American Studies, ban AP Psychology, Don't Say Gay, ban books, yada, yada. So it's very important that people know the political machinations behind this. It's very important that people know what Moms for Liberty really is. It's very important people know the whole right-wing agenda. Now with that, they have started laundering it through stuff like parental freedom, parents' choice, right? And so they have concocted certain manufactured controversies. And I'm in Virginia, so I'll tell you straight up, my kids go to Virginia public schools. This stuff is not being taught in the curriculum. I know, I got 2 kids there. It's not even in the lesson plans. But then on the WhatsApps and through disinformation, you see parents saying, oh, they're teaching our kids this and that. I'm like, do you have proof? I've heard. And so,
right.
I've heard of it. I'm like, who? No, I heard. And they bullied my kid. Did they? Well, they bullied a kid in Canada. I'm like, yo, if a teacher bullied a kid, that would be friggin' on Fox every day, like about this stuff, right? So what we're seeing really, I just want to get to the heart of it before I really tackle directly your question, is fear. Fear, manufactured fear, panic, it's nothing new, but right now it's under going after the transgenders. Now, yes, in your home, parents, have this like, you have a right to raise your kid the way you raise your kids. This is nothing new. When you send your kids out to the world, to school, you entrust in a way the teachers to teach them about the world. So suppose in your home, you're like, I don't believe in evolution. I believe in creationism. A teacher's job living in the modern world is to teach your kid about evolution. Whether you believe it or not, it's up to you. But that's what teachers got to do. Look, you could be like, I don't believe in math. I believe 2 + 2 = 5. your teacher's going to be like, I understand you believe 2 + 2 = 5, but 2 + 2 = 4. All right, I got to teach you that. Woke history. We don't teach the
Waj, no, 2 + 2 = 4. That makes me feel, bad. So you can't teach it.
That's exactly. And so when it comes to the LGBTQ stuff, I want to be very honest here. I'll be super blunt with you. As a practicing Muslim, okay, I wrote that New York Times article. You have never seen me publicly or privately. I don't think you've ever heard, no one's ever heard me say, you know what? According to traditional Islam and the scholars, I think that gay sex is halal. Or maybe gay marriage is halal. I think the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ, peace be upon him, will be okay with it. You've never heard me say it, Corey. And so people, all these Muslims have gone after me. There's like, oh, you flaming liberal, you lefty, you how dare you say that? I'm like, look at what I said. I said in a pluralistic society.
Pluralistic is the key.
Where we live in a messy but multiracial democracy, where Muslims in particular, the past 20 years, have been attacked, where the same tactics were used against Muslims to ban Sharia. Same exact playbook. Just replace Sharia with LGBTQ, trans, or CRT. It was the same playbook, Corey. Where Donald Trump literally in May said, if I run again, I'm going to do a Muslim ban. You are opening the doors to bigots who will not only ban books written by or about LGBTQ, black women, but also, Corey, anything and everything that makes them feel uncomfortable including history books and books written by Muslim authors. And I know this because I have Muslim authors telling me their books are being banned because in their fictional books, their YA books, there's something about Islam. And they're like, I'm fighting this in Texas. So I'm like, you are being used to launder white supremacist tactics and parental fears, which is the easiest thing to always get traction, right? Crime, sex, it's nothing new. Parental freedom. Your reptilian brain is being hijacked by certain right-wing forces to go after a marginalized community because they're saying they're going to make your kid trans. Meanwhile, the reality is that these kids, the LGBTQ kids, if you just step back for a second, step away from Hollywood movies, are the most marginalized kids in America, right? And so if a teacher makes a space, Corey, to be like, I'm not asking you to accept gay sex or gay marriage, but by the way, gay people exist. Muslims exist. Christians exist. Jews exist. Right. Black people exist. It's my job to teach you about this. You go do what you want with it. Aren't we making our kids more resilient? Aren't we making our kids more aware? And so the tension will always exist. But as a parent, my wife and I have talked about this. We're like, and this is where it goes back to the kids' agility. My kids are 9, 7, and 4. And Corey, talk to kids about this. This is what's so funny to me. It's the parents who are freaking out. You go talk to kids. This is kids, a 10-year-old, 11-year-old, 12-year-old in America. Yeah, okay, I have a friend who's trans. They're non-binary, whatever. Okay, anyway, let's go watch Pokemon. I have a friend. They go by they, them, whatever. Yeah, anyway, so
it's such a non-issue.
Yeah, it's not an issue, man. They don't. It's always the suburban parents. It's the kids. Kids don't give a shit. Kids are cool. They're like, I don't think it's weird, but whatever. Anyway, can you please make me something other than PB&J for lunch? So that's my whole take on it, and I wanted to spend a little bit of time on it to give a very honest, thorough assessment of why I spoke out as a practicing Muslim who is not convinced. And I'll say this: I'm not convinced, looking at the traditional Islamic scholarship, that certain actions and behaviors of the LGBTQ people are considered halal. And by the way, if you're LGBTQ listening to this, you don't have to convince me. Live your life. Live your life. Be free. I will fight for your right to be free. Just like I'm not going to waste my time convincing you about the existence of Allah and the Prophet Muhammad. I don't care. Mock religion if you want. But just let me go to worship. Let me pray. And onto you, your way, onto me, mine. We'll agree about 8 things. We might not agree about 10 things, but that's okay. 8 out of 10 is fine. As long as you and I and our families agree that we get to live with peace and security in this country called America.
Well, that answers my next question. So I have so much else to talk about. I could steal another 5 hours. But I do need to ask you, you've already been sort of talking about this, the TP&R question, which is, what do you think? So it's interesting. I just want to contextualize because I've been listening to a lot of Democracy-ish. I read your book again, and I was wondering who the intended audience is. Is it, you used the term in last week's episode of Democracy-ish, catharsis. Is it catharsis for where you're like another expression would be preaching to the choir, or is there persuasion? Is the intent for folks that disagree with you 20% of the time or even 10% of the time to be reading and then maybe to persuade them on it, whether it's a topic like this or any number of the things that you talk about with Danny on Democracy-ish? Go ahead.
I think both. Look, I remember. So I'll give an example. I'm being invited to my alma mater, my UC Davis King Hall Law School, in like 2 weeks for their racial justice series, and they have me. It's nice. After 15 years and going back and speaking. And the reason I mention this is when I was at UC Davis as a student, we put on something called Minority Reports, and where it would be like twice a year during lunch, and there'd be 3 speakers. And the 3 speakers will get 15 minutes each to tell their story. That's it. And mind you, law school and law firms at those days were even less diverse, Corey. All right. And still in leadership, it's very white world. So it was like, just come listen to a story of your colleague, an Iranian American woman, a black man, a black Christian woman. I remember one time we had a Palestinian. And that's it. And I remember after one of those events, there was a member of the administration, and I think she was, I guess she was doing DEI at that time, alumni outreach, Asian American woman. And she said, hey, listen, I just want to tell you something. I've been trying to reach this guy. And this guy at the time was your old school, white, conservative, neocon Federalist Society member, right, in law school. And she goes, he just never, very agitated, if you will, by discussions about racial justice and diversity and kind of shut down, thought it was political correctness. She goes, I've just been trying to reach him, all year. And he came to me and he said, going to Minority Reports and listening to the story of one woman kind of made him see things differently. And he's like, oh, I get it now. And she said, listen, I just want you to know that I've been trying to reach this guy for a year, but it was that story that did it. And so thank you for putting that on and keep doing it. Yeah. And so you never know, Corey, right? At the end of the day, look, I always tell people we're only responsible for ourselves and our own intentions and our own actions. That's it. We're just, who are we? We're nobody. There's 8 billion people on this earth, and we're here for a limited time. At the end of the day, I think you and I believe that we have a loving, merciful creator, and that inshallah one day we will meet our creator and we will be held to account for our actions, right? That's all I can control. And so I can only tell my story. And the hope is that first and foremost, the people who read it, they find it engaging and entertaining. I don't want to bore you. I think boring you is a sin. And then hopefully they can find it, maybe edifying and educational, and it could give you insight and perspective. Like, I never thought about that. And what we have learned through science is that reading fiction, reading stories, and listening to stories in particular builds and expands human empathy, Corey. Yeah. Right? It does. Literally, storytelling and listening to stories helps build empathy. STEM can only take you so far, folks. You still need the humanities, right, if you want to be a human being. So that's my end goal, right? And so many people now, it's been a year since the book has come out, have said, I never thought about it that way. I saw the last 20 years through a different perspective. He's lived a life I'll never live, but made me think. Oh, it took me to another person's life. I stepped in another person's shoes. And if that can create more awareness and more intentionality and better actions and behaviors in people, then that's a win.
Right. That reckons with, we've had some folks on here that are part of Braver Angels. I'm a delegate, proud to be a delegate. And one of the first questions we learned to ask is, what in your life experience led you to that position? As opposed to responding to someone who says, I'm voting for Trump. Immediately, that's crazy. You're dumb. You're racist. And here's 17 stats to tell you why you're a racist. That's not a very good response. But
usually doesn't work.
Right. But getting someone to tell their story, it engenders a sense of empathy. It engenders a sense of community. It engenders a sense of identification with that person and connecting with that person. We're storytelling creatures.
That's right.
Last 2 questions. One quick one. One maybe not quick one, but one definitely quick one. The maybe not quick one is, do you have any questions for me?
A question that I have for you is, what gives you hope in what seems like utterly hopeless times? Or what keeps giving you hope?
That's a good
Especially
question.
you, a person who has, and I appreciate you sharing, has depressive tendencies, and you know how hard it is to get out of bed. So maybe
Yeah.
even an easier question, and maybe this is even a tougher question. What keeps you getting out of bed, putting on your pants or shorts, sitting in front of the mic, and doing what you do, despite both the demons that you have to battle internally and the demons you and I have to battle in the real world?
You know, the first thing that comes to mind, and maybe it's just the immediacy of it, is guys like you would say yes to something like this. That guys or women, people whose work I've admired for years, whose work in our public square are admirable, that I've admired and respected, that a nobody like me can reach out kind of out of the blue and they would say, yeah, that sounds like fun. You know, when I always have this upside down, the Lauren Boebert moment. Don't you know who the hell I am? I have an upside down version of that, which is like,
Beetlejuice.
yeah, don't you know I'm a nobody? Like, and you're saying yes to me to spend some time and talking about this politics and religion thing. That gives me hope. And the fact that I've been able to nurture relationships with people who are really contributing in positive ways to the culture, whether it's great thinkers like Jonathan Rauch and Pete Wehner, great activists like Danielle Moody, or Rev Jackie, who I know you know as well in New York. These are inspirational humans, you know? And like I said, if nothing else gets me out of bed, my dogs get me out of bed. They give me hope. They still expect me to feed them exactly at 6 o'clock in the morning and 4 o'clock in the afternoon. I don't mean to be dismissive of the answer, but that definitely, it gives me hope that folks care enough to have these conversations, to figure out how to do this thing better, this democracy thing better, this, you know, experiment better, this community thing better. So that gives me hope.
No, man, I appreciate your answer. We all need it sometimes because I feel like, you know, I'm a naturally, I think, I try to be a very optimistic, forward-driven person, but the waswasa, there's a great word in Arabic called the waswasa. It means the whispers. And specifically, it's the whispers that can bring you down, the whisper that incites you to sin or greed or lust or envy. The waswasa that brings out the worst part of yourself, right? The golem, the waswasa that makes you into a golem. And the waswasas can be very, very powerful. They can overwhelm you, and they can keep you in bed. And so we all need something, I think, and some advice in some of these moments where we are reminded that the opposite of hope is apathy. And so we need things to keep us hopeful and to keep us engaged with the world, with our loved ones, and simply sometimes just to get out of bed.
Yeah.
You know, and it's about movement. You know, and for some people, it's very hard to move when they're like, why should I move towards my own apocalypse? But I feel like, you know, there's that great saying within our traditions, exists within all of our monotheistic traditions, and I'll paraphrase what the Prophet Muhammad said. He said one time that even if you see the day of judgment coming around the corner, plant a seed. And so our job is to plant seeds. And, you know, at the end of the day, we're just human beings, man. Our job is to plant the seed, and inshallah, if it bears fruit, so be it.
Man, that might be the title of our episode. So that's a good word. So real quick, before we go, how can folks find you? More information about Democracy-ish, your book, and all the great work that you're doing.
Yeah, so, you know, I co-host this lovely podcast with Danielle Moody called Democracy-ish. It comes out every Thursday. And it's like, you know, it's just us trying to preserve and protect both our democracy and our sanity in times where both are under massive duress. The book is called Go Back to Where You Came From, and other helpful recommendations on how to become American. It was released on paperback about 8 months ago. And I'm unfortunately still on the Twitter and thread. And I unfortunately tweet and thread too much.
What's the thread one? It's because it's different. It's
Insta Wajahat, I think. Insta
Wajahat. Yeah,
and then
I'll share.
Twitter is at Wajahat Ali.
I'll share all that in the show notes. Thank you, Waj. This was really awesome. It's so nice to visit with you. I want to make sure that we do this again. Please say hi to Danny and all my friends over there. And I'd really like to see. Thank you so much for spending the time, man. I'd like to keep it going, keep the conversation going.
No, I appreciate it. And here's hoping we get a 4-star to replenish the 2-star, and then just to keep things honest, a 1-star.
We'll get a 1-star. There's something along the lines of, these are the same people who, and they talk about, me based on whatever, and or why don't you spend your time talking about persecution by prosecution, or I don't know if you've gotten any of those.
Yeah.
So
Hunter
anyway,
Biden got indicted. Hunter Biden just got indicted as we were taping this on gun charges. Just happened. So now they'll be like, talk about Hunter Biden's indictment, and what I say to that, real quick, is Hunter Biden was indicted on gun charges. Hunter Biden is not running for president, but the 2024 GOP presidential candidate, Donald Trump, has been
91
4 times. So there you go. Hunter Biden has something in common with Donald Trump.
I literally said that.
America.
I literally said that yesterday. Somebody said, "What, Hunter Biden?" I said, "I can promise you, I will not be voting for Hunter Biden." Anyway, all right. Sorry.
See you, man.
Thanks for giving me the extra time. I'll let you know when this comes out, and I'd love to stay in touch, man. Thank you so much.
Peace.
And as always, if you dig what we're doing here, subscribe, rate, and review. Hopefully a 5-star, not a 2-star, not a 1-star. 4 stars would be cool, but 5-star would be awesome. And tell a friend about talking politics and religion without killing each other. Seriously, taking the time to write a review really does make a difference, and telling a friend about a particular episode like this one. Maybe you agree with some stuff, you disagree with some other stuff, and that could spur a conversation with you and your neighbor, you and one of your cousins, you and your friend from church or temple or wherever you're going. That's the idea, is to get into these conversations and figure out how to do it better. Talk politics and religion without killing each other. We are easy to find, politicsandreligion.us. That's www.politicsandreligion.us. Or you can find me at Corey S. Nathan. That's at Corey, S as in Sam, Nathan, at Corey S. Nathan. Now, go talk some politics and religion with gentleness and respect, and have a great week.